Welcome to Restaurants Reinvented, the podcast for restaurant executives where we go beyond the four walls of the store and talk about industry, trends, strategies, and challenges that the C-suite tackles every day. Your host is Jen Kern, a career marketer across multiple industries and the CMO of QBeyond. Now let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Restaurants Reinvented. This is Jen Kern, and today I am joined with Darien Bates. He is the CEO and co-founder of Fourtop Solutions, along with Ben Pryor. And I would be remiss if I didn't welcome you all to 2023. So happy New Year, everyone. This will be our first episode of 2023, and I'm really excited to get started with Darien. By way of background, Darien, prior to starting Fourtop Solutions, was the CTO and Pizza, where we know that he was very instrumental in building out the infrastructure there and all the technology tools that they have and really helping that brand grow, which is a local darling brand of mine. And before that, he was the SVP of Applied Data Strategy at Datanova. He also founded a company called Dataleo. Did I say that right? Dataleo?
Dataleo is like Galileo, but with data, possibly an esoteric reference.
I like that. So there you go, Dataleo. And also has a background in fintech as well as in marketing. So Darien, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here.
Absolutely. It's great to be here, Jen. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah. One of the things that we've been talking about a lot is how restaurants use technology. And I would even take a step back and think about how restaurants view technology today and how that's changed. So in your estimation, how do you believe restaurants need to view and use technology differently today than we have in the past?
Sure. I think there's a core thing, and I think it's changing with a lot of restaurant brands right now, especially with a lot of some of the really interesting leaders I'm seeing coming in, where I think some restaurants are starting to realize that technology isn't a prepackaged meal. Technology is more like ingredients. Like when you're buying a technology system, whether it's a POS, whether it's an order aggregator, whether it's a survey system or something like that, ultimately you're actually underneath the brand features and underneath the logo, there actually are a set of core capabilities that are really useful to be able to apply in a number of different areas. And I think traditionally restaurants have sort of looked at technologies and say, well, the tool says it does this, and so I can apply it to this use case.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I love the metaphor of putting it in food terms, right? So don't look at your technology and buy your technology like it's a meal. You want to be looking at the ingredients. So how do you recommend to folks to do that? What are some of the ingredients that people should be looking at versus the meals, the prepackaged meals, like you said? Mhm. 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 I'm just curious how all these things came together for you to found Fourtop Solutions. I assume that some of these metaphors and ideas that we're talking about how people think about their technology in restaurants, how people are using technology, boiling down and looking at these ingredients. Is that something that Fourtop Solutions was founded on?
I mean, it's a core principle of what we do. The Fourtop ultimately is, I mean, the term that we were kind of using and still use pretty regularly is this concept of a rehydratable data architecture, which at the core
Okay.
is the
What
idea
does that mean?
that, yeah, exactly. That's why maybe I'm being told not to use it that often. The idea, the metaphor that always comes to mind whenever I say that is more of the idea of if you imagine those little like life rafts in a cube that you have on ships where you pull the cord and suddenly you have a boat. I always think about that around when you're setting up architecture. Often architectures come to be rather organically. I haven't met a lot of or worked with a lot of restaurants that had just an existing architecture that's been fully documented that they like are saying, well, this is where everything exists right now. This is our intentional map and diagram of how everything plugs into each other. And so this is where we see our next choice fitting in. Usually what ends up happening, these systems grow organically. There's a use case that comes up and someone makes a buy decision on something and then they say, well, then I need this data over here and they plug it in. And then these things kind of get plugged in together and they can turn into a little bit of a light socket that has like a string of, you know, extension cords plugged into each other where they just kind of get there. And I think when you think about what we saw over and over again, what I've seen in other industries as well, is that the way those systems plug in together either allows data to flow in really logical ways that are accretive as it flows, meaning that the data can come into a system, add additional enrichment, be protected and preserved there and codified there so that you can see where the data is and you can trust that it's there. You have monitoring on those areas and then it can be a resource elsewhere. I think prototypically we think about this as a hub and spoke model as opposed to sort of a
Mhm.
daisy chain of systems and that hub has to have real governance on top of and real trust. And I think for me, both in the times that I've managed technology programs and the times that I've been on the other side providing data and being accountable for the quality of that data, the idea of having a single place to be able to both see the data and to be able to validate it and to problem solve and ensure that it can be trusted is really important. And I think as you build out more and more complex architectures and as you're putting more and more essential business use cases on top of your data, having an
Mhm.
architecture that ensures ease of troubleshooting, compliance, single points of compliance management, kind of, easy data flows and real-time access. All of that is really important to be able to kind of scale up uses of data in some really in ways that can be really exciting in the use cases that you enable.
So the architecture is also something that has become more mainstream with restaurants. Just in the 4 years that I've been in the industry, I've heard a lot more operators and owners, leaders talking about the importance of architecture and the architecture that's underlying the entire technology. So is that what you're talking about with Fourtop Solutions, that you're helping to rebuild the architecture, or you say rehydratable, you're rehydrating, it sounds
Right.
like.
Well, we are the architecture. Like that's
Okay.
ultimately, so we are actually those connective tissues between systems and ultimately a central data hub. So the data gets flowed into a central database and then
Mhm.
there's a process called data fusion that then basically runs models on that and pulls that data up into a coherent way. If you think about the idea, uh, the best metaphor that I can think of is we talk about data like it's water. Data flows, data leaks, data can flood,
Mhm.
there's all these, we have downstream uses of data. Like water is a prevalent metaphor for data. And
Mhm.
the reason is because it functions a lot like water in the sense that if you think about your having a glass of water, it seems very contained and manageable. But if you think about like an ocean of uncontained water, it's overwhelming. And if you go tell an analyst to go pull a glass of water, go pull this specific water out of the ocean, that's a lot of the
Mhm.
ways that it can start feeling when you have a lot of data. And this concept of big data really is just like you have an ocean of data now.
Mhm.
And one of the things that the way that Fourtop functions in general, and really it's regardless of whether it's Fourtop or whether it's just how you're pulling data together, you have to pool all that data into one place. You have to flow it in there and it has to be in a single place. But what you've
Mhm.
done and when you do that is you then create an ocean of data. It's just a single ocean. You don't have like multiple pools and puddles sitting everywhere, but you still have to then have a way of applying logic on top of that and programming on top of that to turn that ocean into all the different cups and glasses and structures that you need to see that data in. And that's really the programming inside the tool itself is doing that. It's making that water not just available but coherent.
Wow. Okay. I love the metaphor. I'm sticking with the ocean metaphor. I know we started with
Okay.
food, which is good too, but I love the ocean metaphor because when I think about, so I'm thinking like Four-Top Solutions. So what you're doing is you're organizing the ocean.
Yeah.
It's organizing the ocean. Wow, that's no small
We're
job.
not
Um,
boiling it, but we are organizing it a
you're
bit.
organizing the ocean, and the architecture and the data in using that metaphor of the ocean, it's just so helpful because I feel like when people talk about data, nobody knows what anybody else is talking, particularly when you talk about big data. I mean, I've had people come on the podcast and say, there is no such thing as big data. It's a
Mm,
misnomer. And it's like, well, it's a thing, but everybody thinks of it differently.
right.
And when it comes to data in restaurants, again, another term, everyone's talking about data. Well, what do we mean by data? We're trying to get data that's actionable. We're trying to the data that means something. And to your point, we just need to get that data centralized first. We need
Right.
to get it pulling all into one place. So you're like this vacuum in the ocean. You're like a suction cup, right? You want to be. Well, I'm not trying to
Yep.
tell you
I
how
mean,
to.
I think that's the first step of it. I think centralization has to happen, and so everything does need to be plugged into a place that pulls it together. It's the processes from there, like having data commingled, which is a technical term for data all being in the same data lake, is the first step. There are still
Mhm.
multiple steps of refinement to get that data into a place that it makes sense and that is also really
Mhm.
accessible. One of the things about, and at risk of being too esoteric on the data side, I do think this is an interesting way to think about what's happening with data and what's happening with certain systems that can be the blocker to really using data in the ways that we think about, as in these advanced use cases, is
Mhm.
often when data is pulled like into one place, and then there'll be some sort of automation or sequenced event that will analyze that data, And you think about it, there's can be ETL tools where extract, transfer, load that start moving data like down like an assembly line. And so usually this happens overnight or something like that, where all the data then gets processed down this assembly line. And every night you rerun everything on the same data. What happens is all your data is being processed every day. And the second thing is that your data is only being processed daily versus like every time an order comes in. So it's one order comes in, there is data on that order that should be immediately pulled out of that order, for example, and put in various places. And the analysis should be run on an object by object basis. So you're essentially watching an order coming in, it's being split apart 4 parts and applied to various models as it comes in. And then what that means is that your data is actually refreshed in your data lake. Your models are up to date in real time, which means that when you start looking at customer uses, where you want something like an order to come in, and if that triggers something on the customer, that might very well create an action, whether it's, in the case of someone like an Ant Pizza, creates like an SMS action outbound, or whether it's the case of like, an offer is dropped or they receive a reward. Like that has to happen. You have to analyze the data in flow and apply it in flow as opposed to a big overnight process. That's, to complete the metaphor, that's like boiling a cup of water rather than boiling the ocean. And those kinds of logical changes to how your architecture works fundamentally changes like what you're able to do with the data and makes some of the utilization and the use cases that we start talking about when we start using conceptual words like AI and automated decisioning viable.
You've started this company that's really getting to the core of data, helping to organize that, helping to make that data more living, breathing, live, actionable data. I got to think that you, being on the operator side and now being on the tech side, when you were an operator, I'm guessing that you saw an opportunity here, right? That's what people start companies. You saw something missing in the restaurant industry, and that's why you were spurred to create this company. What did you see that was missing?
Well, I think I saw this in a lot of places. I would actually say that it actually came to a lot of conversations with partner providers who I think are some of the greatest resources for information, such as this podcast. And I saw it with a lot of other brands that were trying to work through like service delivery models or other types of engagement models that it actually was a little surprising to me that they hadn't already been solved in some ways. Because, I come out of kind of data architecture and data companies. Like the last 2 I worked at were built around doing this kind of work. And it really took a few years of talking with restaurant tech people, talking with restaurant operators, and just realizing that some of the things that I thought could have been solved or should have been solved in some ways were really out there not having been solved. Like there were blockers to doing some things that felt like these should be enabled. And a lot of it is around things like customer engagement. A lot of it is around enabling operations to act on more real-time data. And it just wasn't available. And the pain points started feeling visceral. And, one of our co-founders, Ben Pryor, who serves as president for Fourtop, he's 30 years in the industry as an operator, starting off as, opening locations, training, running locations, and then eventually moving up into technology, but really with the mindset of an operator. And he and I started talking a few years ago, introduced through, I think, an FS Tech panel that we were on together when we all went virtual. And in talking with him, he really made clear to me like how much pain this is causing operators in terms of not having access to data quickly and not being able to act upon it in ways that enabled them to close the gap on some real issues quickly enough. Things like scheduling problems, things like inventory problems. I mean, like this has always been the case. This is a problem that there is no kind of built-in solution for. And that I think really inspired me to work with him and to start moving forward on this idea more broadly.
Okay. And how do you believe restaurants can use data more effectively?
I think there's 2 things. And it's in a way I I believe it's letting the robots be the robots and letting the humans be more human. And I think it's really starting to think about like what your technology does better than people and what your people do better than like automated technology systems. And so on the one side, and allowing those things to deviate further and further from each other. And the other day, and I think you commented on this, I made this comment that like dashboard, I was writing an article and I wrote that dashboards are a place where data goes to die. And what I mean by that is not that dashboards aren't useful. It's that a dashboard is a little bit neither fish nor fowl when it comes to making use of data. Like a dashboard as a daily checkpoint for data, it's a little bit like looking at the sky and saying, well, the sun is up, and so we have another day. And so what are you going to do about it now? Like the thing's already done, the sales are already in, whatever that is. And so any decision you would make upon that would be reactive and would frankly the horse is already out of the barn. But it is essential for humans to see data. It's essential for humans to have access to data in a way that they can work with it and manipulate it and really go at the meaning of it. And I don't think that happens necessarily in a dashboard. It happens in tools that can be used for dashboards, data discovery tools. The BI tools that we talk about that often are used to deliver dashboards are the same tools that you can do drill downs in and really pull apart what the insight is. And that's what humans do best. Humans are great discoverers, right? I would argue that is maybe a classic human trait, is to be a discoverer. And so when a human gets data, they should always be oriented towards discovery. What does this tell me? What can I discover out of this? Then I can apply somewhere. What is the insight? What is the action item that I can then put into an application of some sort and to make something progressively better? So the dashboard to me, the daily dashboard doesn't do that. The daily dashboard to me just tells me, oh, that's what our sales yesterday. And I'm not saying that there isn't value in something like hey, we overscheduled yesterday, go tell that location, that restaurant over there to be a little bit more careful about its scheduling. Those are operative items. But there's the other thing which you can do with data, which is increasingly possible, which is starting to automate things and apply data more directly into automated decisioning, where it doesn't have to go to a VP of ops to look at an overscheduling instance and then to talk to the shop leader or the restaurant manager and say, schedule better. It can start forming like real-time actions of, hey, you're running over your labor hours, or sales are behind what they're expected to be, might want to consider trimming hours now, et cetera. Like there's things that systems are really good at in moving. When data indicates that something is moving against expectation, you can make quicker decisions and you don't have to go through a chain of humans who have to look at a dashboard to read that out. And so I think as we start thinking of data as both being a flow system that can operate a little bit autonomously, in the parlance, AI as in a broad concept, we need to think about how does a human discover something inside data and then move that discovery into automation in a way that has a better relationship between humans and machines, rather than sitting in this kind of like in-between space where it's like, well, I see the data every day, so I'm sure that's providing value, which is where I think we often get lost in the data a bit.
Right. Yeah, well, it's such a relatable concept, this idea of data going to die in a dashboard. At least for me, it's very relatable because we've been using dashboards for so long and it really hasn't solved a lot of the problems that we're experiencing today when it comes to data, which is what you're talking about, which is making it more real time. I mean, I hate to use the word real time, but
Right.
it's making it more real time. It's getting access and being able to pivot quickly, which is something that we at Q have been trying to help restaurants with as well through the POS, not looking at the POS like you said, like this prepackaged meal,
Right.
right? But it's an ingredient of the whole ecosystem. It's just one channel. And the
Yep.
more important part is the architecture and how that's being built. And our architecture is also built in where you can access the data. The data is
Yep.
there anytime you need it. So what would be an example that you could give to someone in terms of like us, like a POS company, like here's the architecture. How would that architecture help with the POS and the online ordering and the survey systems and, all the other tools that restaurants are using right
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, and I have so much respect, particularly for the way that Q has been building its architecture. What I would say is that POSs sometimes don't recognize how much value they have, and they sometimes overlook their greatest assets in the pursuit of something they're less good at. POSs have an immense value. And the biggest value that they have is they have the ultimate real estate, which is they are in front of the employee's eyes, right? Like, I think this is a thing that gets overlooked. They are the interface for employees more than any other interface because the employee has to look at it. The employee has to type it into place of sale, often is being used to clock in on. Often this is we talked about, back in my kind of digital marketing days, we would talk about the fact that there are very few websites that are just essentially people's landing pages. And if you remember the old AOL world, it's like, well, your landing page was always AOL. And that was actually a huge asset. They were actually able to leverage that asset for a lot of value and a lot of revenue for advertising, for other types of partnerships, because they knew that when people logged in, they had this place where they always went. And I think POS is under recognized sometimes how valuable that asset is and how that can be used in increasingly sophisticated and accretive ways for restaurants. And I think it's something that I think Q is doing very well, which is recognizing that if you have the ability to receive in information from other systems and you have the ability to have that information from any architecture come in and deliver insight, the POS and any kind of associated apps that the POS delivers can start becoming much more of an action central for restaurants. And that is what they do. I think that is what they do best. It is very difficult to build an interface that people are going to look at. The POS has it. So what do you do with that real estate? And instead, what I often see POSs doing right now is they're trying to retrofit being the hub. And they're built more as sources and as action centers as opposed to being data hubs. And in trying to be data hubs, they kind of end up in a place where they aren't quite sufficient in delivering some of the core aspects of being a strong data hub, which is having really solid architecture, trust metrics, the ability to pull apart where the systems are, easy integrations where they can be pulled in quickly, algorithmic deduplication, algorithmic data fusion. Like, those processes are not things that POSs are necessarily built to do. Those are I would argue that those are whole businesses in and of themselves. But when they have that data coming in and can action off them for operators, whether it's at a point of sale or whether it's at a point of other sort of operational management, there's immense value there. And I see that's how restaurants can start using both centralized data, but then start using these really rich assets in the form of these POSs that they've invested a lot into to be able to really run their restaurant in a more effective way.
So a company can engage with Fourtop solutions at any time, no matter where they are in terms of their tech stack.
I would say yes. I, of course, will be biased here, but I would say sooner the better. I'm always of the belief that the first thing you should do is get your data house in order. From a sequencing standpoint, if you solve your data, every other tool gets easier to activate. If you activate a bunch of tools and then you try to get your data house in order, you're often doing a lot of rework. So if you can afford the delay between starting a new loyalty program and getting your data house in order, I would get your data house in order first and then launch a new loyalty program. It's just going to save time and money and probably get a better experience out of your loyalty program. Obviously, that's, we all work in the real world. So at any point, you can drop in the Fourtop architecture, and it can kind of rework that structure to make it more coherent and make it more intuitive. But I would recommend, and I have in many cases, saying if you're going to make a major decision, probably want to start with getting your data organized and to own it. I mean, one of the big things we believe at Fourtop is that the data is owned by the restaurant. All the data is after it's pulled together in the lake and it's made coherent, we export it out to clients' own databases that they own. So the client always has a copy of its data at all time in the most enriched state. So they can kind of do with it what they want. It's their data. We just do the work of making sure that it's as clean and as useful as possible.
Great. What do you see, Darien, as the next utilization for restaurants when it comes to data? Where do you see us going next?
I mean, I think this is where I'm going to use the dreaded word AI. because it's so fraught with all these things. I was listening to a futurist talk the other day, and they were saying AI is you might destroy the human species in 2 to 300 years. Not that kind of AI, but I do think it is conceptually, it's going to be AI, and it's going to be in there's almost going to be a couple different species of intelligences that we'll be looking at. The one is these kind of automated decisionings that get more and more dialed in, more sophisticated, where the algorithms get more specific in what the business is trying to activate. And on the other side, I think we're going to be moving more towards these what are called generative intelligences, which is really what we saw, if any of your audience knows about ChatGPT and that release, which is these ideas, these intelligences that can answer more open form questions, like, what is my forecast going to be next week, right? The idea that you can ask a machine, what is my forecast going to be? Not that you have built a forecast, that you can ask them what its forecast is going to be, and they're going to apply a forecasting model as part of the intelligence that is most optimal fit. Like I think that's the direction that we're increasingly going to be going. The intelligences are actually increasingly there. The models to create those intelligences are real. And ChatGPT sort of demonstrates that in some ways. But if you do go look at if you ask ChatGPT what your forecast is for next week, their answer is going to be, or its answer, his answer, her answer, we don't need to gender it. The answer is going to be, I don't have access to your data. I don't know. So that access to your data is going to be, and access to data, not just having it in one place, but I was saying having it in a coherent, structured way that an intelligence can read it and do all that cross joins and do the real-time analysis to be able to provide back answers. That's going to be the difference between being able to get real insight on a second-by-second basis versus working in the world where you still have to ask somebody to go away for a week to bring you back a forecast when, it's likely, water under the bridge by the time you get the insight. Or having to manage a team of 20 to 30 analysts at times, which is happening in some of the larger institutions. And so I think those two places of real-time automation, where you have decisions that are being made by systems, and at the same time, the ability to ask questions of your data in increasingly sophisticated ways to get to insights at a fraction of the time that you used to, so that you can adjust your business so that humans can make course corrections, make smarter decisions, and really do it on the advice of, I would say, expert models, which is really, I think, is a huge value there. I do have one watch out on all of that, which I think is really essential and is a big commitment that we're making as a company, because while we describe ourselves in the short term as a data enablement company, a data architecture company, we are really an AI enablement company. We put the data into that place where it can be used. But we also feel that we have a deep responsibility to ensure that these automated decisions, the AI models, are responsible, and that they are doing things that are making the entire experience of being in a restaurant better, both the guest experience, but also the employee experience. There's ways of applying automated decisioning and AI in ways that can be incredibly accretive to the employee experience. And there's other ways in which it can be really reductive and really problematic in how it's applied. And you can go from having one bad manager to having a really bad AI manager that can really do some problematic things to how labor is treated, how humans kind of operate within this environment. And we believe that there's a core responsibility for anybody who's moving down this path to really consider what is the human-machine relationship, such that you create a better operating system, a better operating restaurant, and a better operating environment for humans.
Yeah, well, that goes back to what you started out with early on, which is letting humans do what they're really good at, and letting technology do what it's really good at.
A brand that's doing that really well, and I'm really excited to talk about if I can bring it up a little bit. We're starting to work with Heart House, and Andy Hooper, the CEO there, I think has a real vision for exactly this. He brings to, I think, the industry what I would say is a very compelling vision of kind of human first operations. And so, we started working with him about 6 weeks ago. We've really begun the process with him. We've been talking with him for a little bit longer. But their vision there is they do plant-based foods and they try to be employee first. So they They're doing two things that are really kind of like revolutionary, and they're really aiming for a kind of deep sustainability, both in terms of the ability to move into a plant-based environment where you're looking at the sustainability of producing that versus kind of the heavy carbon-based production of meat. And at the same time, within this like rising cost of labor, and we were actually seeing a tapering off of humans in the world and all of that, like they're looking at what does the future look like and how do you operate in this model where your supply chain has to look differently and your management of human capital has to start looking differently. And Andy came to us, we sat down in a meeting with him, and he said like something that really resonated with me, which is if you start with the employee experience, it is possible to create benefits for every single other stakeholder, investors, guests, everybody, the community at large. If you don't start with the employee experience first, they will often be they'll be part of the detritus of what happens within a restaurant, and they will end up being on the other side of it and being kind of misused. But it does come down to like you have to be smarter with data. The human labor is a huge part of your prime costs. And so we've been starting to work with them to start producing optimized models for the deployment of labor to make sure that labor is deployed in the most efficient way possible, and using models that are actually coming out of, in some cases, sports, like on off. Who are the employees that like when they are on, there are better guest experiences, there are higher sales, you almost have these correlative models that start saying, supporting recommendations on how to operate your restaurant with the most optimal deployment of labor. And then at the same time, being able to show to investors, to managers that like scheduling in humane ways has immediate value. The idea of reducing turnover, the idea of not scheduling somebody for a late night and then an early morning, to be able to start throwing kind of real smart management logic into that, take into account the long-term costs of employee turnover, but applying that in short-term recommendations on how to manage your business as an infinite game, as something that will always be moving on, and you have to manage finite resources and limited supply chain and slim margins in the most optimal way. And he's thinking about it in a way that I think is more and more restaurants will be operating on. And we're excited to be a part of that because I think it leverages data in a way that I think is both powerful from a business perspective, but fundamentally human in what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, they are taking on two really big areas within our world, the world, the sustainability aspect of a plant-based brand, which, I mean, it's tough. That's not a simple product to deliver.
Yep.
And then starting with the employee experience, which I know that from having Justin Keenan on, I know that from knowing Andy Hooper and knowing how the brand at Pizza operates. I mean, really, truly putting those employees first. I mean, our last series before this one was a labor series and talking about employees and how do we make them really the heart and soul of the brand and help them be stakeholders in the organization. And there's a lot of great, thinking out there now, and we need to see brands like Heart House rising up and trying to tackle this beast and trying to make a go of it and setting some examples. And it sounds like the work that they're doing with you will hopefully net some great examples that we can all learn from. But it's fascinating sort of watching, restaurants and seeing how are they going to tackle this and make a go of this.
Right.
It's not easy. So, I think when we talk about like the future of technology, you mentioned the AI and voice, which are two things, being able to ask questions, two things that came out actually in our digital survey that we do every year this time of year. And when we talked about future innovation, 70% of the responders overall said we're trying to incorporate AI. And then that was followed by voice and robotics, which are all things that you're talking about today. So it's all incredibly relevant.
Yeah, and it's all kind of getting down to this idea of like, how do we do more with less in some ways? And I think I'm reminded of a story. There's a Swiss town that upon automating its final, like they had a mine, and upon automating the final job in that mine, the town held a celebration. And it was like, no one else is going to die in that mine. No one else is going to have these like long-term health effects of like working in that mine. They had solved the issue of an experience that was poor for humans, but was necessary for the community. And so there's a real benefit that we get from finding opportunities for automation in things that are not optimal human experiences. But we have to be very careful about not like removing jobs or removing things that are fundamental to the human experience. Hospitality is a deeply human business, which is why I love it. I love the organic nature of it. And when we start thinking about where we apply things like AI, robotics, things like that, it's like, what are the things that keep this business essential for what it is, which is a connection between humans? And what are the things that allow the humans to operate more and more efficiently every day? And we can all celebrate that. And I think there's a balance there. And I think that balance goes much bigger than just kind of managing restaurants. There's a balance of how do we manage increasingly automated parts of our society. But I think at the core of it, restaurants should take a little bit of a philosophical approach to what is the kind of place we want to be, and what are the kinds of elements of data and automation that we can put into it that can make us better at being the version of the thing that we want to be, as opposed to totally transforming them into something else.
And it's such an important conversation and not a short one, right? This is not a short conversation. Because like you're saying, like hospitality is about the people. And I feel like we've been like pushing that aside, and it's becoming so obvious that we can't push it aside with this employee experience revolution that you're talking about, that we need to have, and we need to spark it, right?
Yeah.
And we need to make these, how do we do that? And then how do we make the technology work better for us? I mean,
right.
These are very complex conversations, and I appreciate you kind of kick it off. I do want to ask you sort of a softball question, something that,
sure.
Another thing that I heard you say, which really made my ears perk up and made me pretty happy, which, there's a lot of talk about legacy technologies that are in this space, and a lot of people are really burdened and slowed down with legacy technologies in restaurants, particularly in the large chains that we work with. And they can it's really difficult for them to make a quick switch to different systems because of what we're talking about, architecture. And you said something recently that there are no bad systems. There's just bad architecture.
I fundamentally believe that. Look, I've started 3 companies in my life, one of which was more of the first one was more of a service company. The second one was a product company that really didn't take off. And hopefully this third one will. I like to think we're ascendant. But anything that has made it to market and is out there and is delivering value and has customers, like there's a core success in there. And I think it's kind of the way that like that young athletes say that the old athletes aren't anywhere near as good as they are. It's like we keep thinking about this transition from one system to the next, from one generation to the next. And sometimes systems can become antiquated, but there's a fundamental truth to why they were successful and what's a part of them that makes them tick and makes them good. And, I come from the fintech space prior to coming into restaurants, and there's so much old technology in banking, and often it gets accused of being outdated. And people forget the counterfactual of when was the last time that you just lost money in flow? Because I can tell you the last time that my Uber just didn't show up, but I can't tell you the last time that my deposit didn't just make it in, right? And so when we think about technologies, recognizing what your technology is trying to do, and that the technologies that are out there that have been doing it for a long time they have fundamental truths to them. I think it's a question of it goes back to what I was saying before about figuring out your objectives and then figuring out how to put your technologies in a place to succeed. Put them in the right architecture, figuring out how they need to plug into each other. And often something that you think of as being antiquated was just in the wrong place, right? And I think when we think about it that way, we're starting to work with a brand that has a legacy system that it came in and was saying, like, I think we have to move off the system. We love the system. We love the team on the system, but it just doesn't do this. And we looked at it and was like, well, it shouldn't do that. That's not what that system is. You can pull that data out. The data is accessible, but you're trying to plug things into that system. It's not meant to be that. But you can pull that data out and run that data through an external integration system, such as Fourtop, and it allows that system to still be good at what it was originally built to be good at. It doesn't need to change. What instead you have is that the use cases, as they advance, you need more and more capabilities to be able to respond to those use cases, while recognizing that sometimes, like, you just need like your bank system to send deposits, right? I encourage everybody when they're looking at their stack to start with the idea, let's assume that everything here exists for a reason and that it is doing a prime function, or else it wouldn't be here at the moment. And then go to what they're trying to accomplish, and then back into the vital changes versus what you can solve by, moving your data out, centralizing it, making it real time, and plugging things into it that way.
Yeah. So there are some systems that just do one thing and one basic thing, but do
Right.
it well. So don't throw it out. And the way that you're talking about like the APIs, the being able to plug and play through Fourtop solutions, what do you say to people that say, oh, well, Fourtop solutions, it's just another one of these like connecting product points. It's not
Right.
really delivering any value. It's just plugging and playing everything.
Yeah, and I think to a certain degree it's going to be in the eye of the beholder. I think for people who say that, I guess the question is do you have all your systems properly connected? Are those working? Because I haven't had a conversation with any brand yet who like has those flows solved. And so I think that question of what a connector is, I think it's more about understanding the value that is created there, and what a good connector is, and what a connector that's not doing enough is. And I think you do need to make sure that if you are using a connection system, it has full transparency on trust. Like you can see at any point where the data is, and is it accurate? Is it, are there systems breaking? Like as you create these system of systems, do you have visibility into the data flows, all of that? Because you're starting to create abstract galaxies of systems interacting with other systems, and they become hard to figure out what's spinning where. And that can be connection tools. When they don't do that, can actually be real drivers of frustration and real risk, including compliance risk. But I would say that like there's a little bit of a show not tell on that one, which is, what aren't you doing because your data is not connected? And I think the proof's in the pudding a little bit. It's a difficult thing because the word integration means so many different things, from just a point-to-point solution to a whole hub and spoke. So it's hard to disambiguate it, but it becomes pretty evident when you start going into the specific use cases.
Thinking like, what are the actionable items that they're taking away? And I hear you circling around this idea. And we talked about the ocean of getting that data centralized, making sure you own the data, and then making sure that you're structuring the data in a way, bringing us to what we're talking about now. You're structuring the data in a way that it can flow in and out and across systems, and then be in a format that's not just going into a dashboard to sit there, but in a format that everybody in the organization can get access and look at that and be able to make some decisions. Is that essentially the right summary of how you're recommending folks to do this sort of sequencing?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay.
I think just starting with the idea of what do you want to accomplish, I think that is always the place to start. Like, what are your business objectives? I joke about the fact that one of the things that I think has made me a good technology leader, if I do say so myself, is that I don't like technology. I'm actually not a fan of it. I have an old phone. I'm actually speaking to you right now. I'm speaking to you right now on like a 2012 iMac. I don't see technology as being a purpose. I see technology as being a tool to accomplish something. You have to start with your purpose and you have to start with your objective. And I think the question that you should ask yourself every single time is, what do I accomplish using technology versus pencil and paper? Like, why don't I just take an order, on a pencil and paper and bring it back to the kitchen, right? What do I lose by doing that? What are my objectives as a business, and why can't I get to those objectives if I work off of pencil and paper? Because if you can do it, you should do that. Pencil and paper is a lot cheaper. I don't think it's possible, and I think we evolve into the uses of technology because of the objectives that we have. But sometimes those objectives aren't made explicit at the time of planning, and we can sometimes put together shopping lists of technologies without realizing what we're trying to do. And so I think it's a good exercise to say, why do we need technology at all? And if you don't. I don't think it's possible, but let that be a possibility first, and then figure out what your stack is once you start with the idea that you don't need one until you do.
Mm-hmm. Such a good point. I mean, yeah, so this is what I love about you is you have such a consultative, strategic mindset. But I'm shocked. When you told me you don't really like technology, I got to say I'm shocked. You have an old phone, I'm shocked. I'm just shocked, Darien. I'm just trying to recover from this.
I have a little phone. I feel like, I think things, the perpetual move towards progress isn't always the right direction to go in. Like there's a lot to be said about doing things the way we were doing things. And you really should stay. If there's good hunting, you should just stay where you are, right? Don't move on if you don't have to. But I do think the trends in the industry are going to force people to move on. But I would say move according to kind of the core things that you need to do.
And the pendulum's always swinging, right? The pendulum's always swinging back and forth between extremes, and the idea is that us on this, the service provider side, help that pendulum just swing a little bit less egregiously from one direction to the next. Right. And what you're talking about is making me think about that, because it's like we have a lot of people that come to us with the RFPs that are literally hundreds of pages long. Like you mentioned the laundry list of technology. And it's like, what about stepping back? I love how you're talking, stepping back and thinking about your business objectives. Do I even need this technology at all? And
right.
And why am I looking for this technology? Like what is our overall objective? And I think that's really hard because of the way a lot of restaurant companies are structured right now. An RFP does get handed over to a CTO or the head of tech, and they go run with this RFP. So what are some of the changes you think might need to happen with an organization to help us embrace this philosophy of don't just go run out and buy the next new shiny gadget that comes out, like be more thoughtful?
Yeah, I think it starts with the idea of starting to think about CTOs and CIOs as being a core strategic function of the business. I think it's a really interesting thing to me when I entered the space that tech departments, it's not uncommon for tech departments to roll up to the CFO, which is an interesting statement about how they're viewed. They're viewed as cost centers, and often kind of as non-strategic cost centers. They're enablement of specific things, and then they have a cost associated with them. And I am seeing kind of a new generation of CIOs and CTOs coming through, who are coming through as strategic leads in the business, who are asking these kind of provocative questions, who are not being incentivized on like what they can build. They're being incentivized on how they lead the organization through change. And I think that I think is a key thing that restaurants should start thinking about is how do I have a tech strategy and how do I have a strategic lead that understands how technology can be of value, not just how to set up technology. And I think that is I would say that comes down to leadership of restaurants and who they're hiring and how they're finding those thinkers. Because what you might find out is actually you have a tech strategy leader and you don't have anyone else on the tech team. You might say, actually, everything else is going to be service work. Everything else is going to be out of the box configuration, and we're going to do it on a fraction of the internal team budget. But we're going to have a lot of really smart, best of class systems and providers. I don't know if that's possible or not. Like, I think there are different sizes of tech teams for different types of concepts. But I think starting with a real kind of leadership direction of saying we need to think of tech as being just as much of our strategy as any other part of our business. And it has to be both right-sized from a capabilities, but also empowered from a leadership part in our business to really to help the organization succeed holistically and make the most out of the resources it has.
Yeah. Well, that is definitely our hope and wish as well.
Right.
And I mean, we started this podcast 3 years ago for marketers with that exact premise, which was, elevating the role of the marketer from a tactical, let's go buy ads and, do TV spend to a strategic leader in the organization. We've seen that change happening, and that change also needs to happen on the technology side. And it's not even a change so much as a new ad, right? It's like
Right.
this needs to be something that restaurants didn't need to be considering in the past, but now need to be considering. More strategic leaders in the organization that understand just smart business strategy and
Right.
starting with these objectives and going from there. So that is definitely the hope that we're banking on, as well, is that the CTOs and the CIOs, the heads of tech, whatever their titles might be, are moving to be like critical thought leaders in the organization, not just taskmasters and taking the list and executing with the list.
Right.
So I'm sure you'll be a big part of that.
I hope. I mean, I think if we talk about the idea that if we can enable a move towards that strategic thinking, like that is a North Star for us. There is no right-sized tech stack. There is a right-fit tech stack. And I think if you can increasingly understand the shape of the organization and the objectives, you can end up in a place where your technology is pretty transformative. And that should look different
Yeah.
for most restaurants. Like they should end up having an architecture diagram 3 years into a plan. The architecture diagram you should be able to intuit what the business is trying to do by looking at the architecture of the organization.
Love it. Well, as
Cool.
we wrap here, I mean, this has been such a great conversation. I would love to know, what are you most excited about? I mean, as you look out across this landscape, this really rapidly changing restaurant landscape, and how things are shifting from customer experience and employee experience, all that kind of stuff, and then look out across the tech world, right? And we talked about ChatGPT, some of these other AIs. What are you most excited about?
Everything feels like it's sort of soft clay right now. Which is really exciting. It feels like we have the ability to remake a number of things, it's not, you're not reshaping entire civilization, but it does feel like there's a lot of things that just don't work anymore, which is really exciting in terms of the things that can be done. And that I think drives us as a business. We, yes, there's enablement of AI and those capabilities, which we think from a technology standpoint, we're in a place that we've never been before. Computing has never been this cheap. Data has never been this easy to flow. Systems have never been this open, right? You look at a raft of new systems that are entering the market, and they're all open tools. They're all ready to plug into other things. And that's really exciting. It's like implicit in all of this is this idea of kind of universal connection from a technology standpoint. And that's the playground. I think connected to that are a set of changing constraints around things like supply chain and labor that is really forcing new thinking around kind of how industry manages itself, both inside the restaurant industry, but really kind of everywhere. And there's some really exciting thinking that is being done, I think, almost at every level of society right now, that is allowing us to rethink the responsibilities and the relationships that we have with each other and that technologists have with the systems that they're creating and how those are supporting people within a community or within an industry. And to risk sounding a little utopian, I do think there's kind of a grand opportunity at this time to push everything towards I think a really powerful direction of collaborative systems, of connected tools, of kind of a better place, a more empowered place for humans, while at the same and moving away from some of the least accretive experiences for humans in the restaurant industry and other industries as well. And I think that makes me sound like a bit of a wild-eyed optimist. But I think I've seen it enough at the kitchen level, if you will, like at the, that these things can be changed and these things can be improved and you can create healthy systems, that I think it's possible. I think it takes a lot of work, and I think it takes constantly asking the hard questions of, are we doing this well enough, or are we taking an easy path? Those, I think, are burdens or are tasks that we have given ourselves, is to kind of keep asking that question. Are we doing the real thing? Which is, I wrote a post about that a little bit ago. Like, is this real? Or are we just creating something that shines as opposed to something that really does the real thing? Does it really make people's lives better? Does it really deliver on the promise? But if it does, it can be a massive fulcrum for really powerful experiences and really powerful change for starting with employees and going up from there.
So there's a lot of clay and we're all
Yeah.
potters. Is what you said.
Exactly. Okay, just get on. It'll be like Ghost.
Go forth and make beautiful pottery.
Exactly. And throw a bad pot every now and then. It doesn't always need to be beautiful.
Yeah, I
Like
mean that's part of it. That's part of it.
exactly. You just bake it.
Throw
It
it
doesn't
away
work.
and try
you just,
again.
Precisely. Exactly. Yeah. It's all iterative. So
It's a big ocean.
it is a big ocean. Jen,
All the
thank you so
metaphors.
much.
All the metaphors.
I know I live by metaphors, so you can have 7 or 8 of them by the time we get to the end of a conversation.
It's a big ocean with a lot of clay. And all right, Darien. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for really stepping up and helping the industry think about these big topics about how we're using data, how we're structuring our architecture, how we're looking at our systems. Most importantly, what are our objectives and why does our business exist? And are we using humans and technology to their best purpose? So many great little nuggets. And I thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. It was a delight. Thank you as always, Jen, and thanks for doing what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Thank you for checking out this episode of Restaurants Reinvented. This show is brought to you by Q, a restaurant tech company paving a brighter future for operators with the industry's first unified commerce platform. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow Restaurants Reinvented in your favorite podcast app or visit qbeyond.com, that's QUBEYOND.com /podcast to find all of your latest episodes.